Hello and welcome to this transmitter programming tutorial for the E-Flite F-16 Thunderbirds 80mm. Today I'll be programming this DX6E transmitter, but these programming instructions are applicable for all Spektrum DX-G2 radios. Let's get started by selecting a new model. Click the scroll wheel and scroll down to System Setup. Click on System Setup and scroll down to Yes and click. Now scroll down to Model Select, click on Model Select, and scroll all the way down to Add New Model. Click on Create. And now we've got a completely blank, brand new model on the transmitter. Let's go down to Model Name and give it a name. Click on Model Name, scroll down, and starting with the first character, I'll name this one F-16 80mm. Now that the model is named, push the back button twice to return back to the home screen. And now click the scroll wheel to go back to the function list and scroll down to DR and Expo to set up our dual rates. The manual calls for high rates of 100% and low rates of 70% with a 10% Expo on the high rates and a 5% Expo on the low rates. Let's set that up now. Starting with the aileron channel, since that's what's already selected, we'll scroll down to where it says Switch On, click and scroll to the right to select a switch. The C switch is a switch commonly used for dual rates, and that's the one I'll be using. Click to lock it in. The 0 position will be our high rates, so we'll leave the dual rates at 100%, but add an Expo of 10%. So click on the zeros next to Expo and bump them up to 10%. And click to lock them in. Now we'll flip the C switch down to the 1 position, our low rate position, and we'll adjust the dual rates down to 70%. Click to lock them in. Now scroll down to Expo and bump those up to 5%. Now we can see our dual rate switch is working as intended for the aileron channel. 0 position high rates, 1 position low rates. Now let's do the same for the elevator and rudder channels. Click on where it says aileron, scroll to the right to change it to elevator and click. Scroll down to Switch On to select the switch. Use the C switch again. C switch in the 0 position, dual rates at 100%. We'll add the Expo of 10% and click to lock it in. We'll bump the C switch down to the 1 position for our low rates, and we'll adjust the 100% down to 70. Then scroll down to Expo and click and add 5% to Expo. You can test to see that that's working, and it is. Now finally, let's do the same thing for the rudder channel. Now we have the rudder channel set. We can test to see that it's working. And now our dual rates and exponential are set up. Push the back button to take us back to the function list. And now let's scroll down to Throttle Cut and click on Throttle Cut. Scroll over to where it says Inhibit and click on Inhibit. And now scroll to the right to select a throttle cut switch. The H switch is most commonly used as the throttle cut switch, and that's the switch I'll be using. We can see that just by selecting a throttle cut switch, it automatically sets our throttle cut position to negative 100%. This is very important when out at the flying field to help reduce the chance of an accidental throttle up. With our throttle cut on, we can see our throttle channel does not move from negative 100%. even as we move the throttle stick. Now that our throttle cut is set, push the back button and scroll down to System Setup. Scroll down to Yes and click on Yes. And now scroll down to Aircraft Type. Scroll down to where it says Wing Normal and scroll to the right. Change it to 1 aileron, 1 flap. And click to lock that in. And click to lock that in. 1 aileron, 1 flap means we'll have 1 channel controlling our ailerons and 1 channel controlling our flaps. Now we can push the back button twice. Click the scroll wheel and now scroll down to Flap System. Click on Flap System. Then scroll over to Inhibit to select a flap switch. The D switch is commonly used for the flap switch. That's the switch I'll be using. Click to lock in your switch. And now, per the manual, we'll leave the 0 position flap value at 0% and the elevator mix at 0%. For position 1, we'll set the flap value to -50%. Click on the 0 and scroll left to bring it to -50. Click to lock it in. And now add a -2 to the elevator mix. Now for position 2, we'll set the flap value to -100%. Click on the 0, scroll left to bring it all the way down to -100%. And then over to the elevator mix, click and bring that down to -16%. And click to lock it in. Now we can see the flaps move as intended. However, they move too quickly. Scroll down to where it says Speed Norm. Click on Norm and scroll to the right to bring it up to 2.0 seconds. Now we can see our flaps come down at a slower, more scale speed. Now that our flaps are set, we can push the back button twice to return back to the home screen. Now our DX6E is programmed and ready to fly the F-16 Thunderbirds 80mm. Thank you for joining me in this tutorial. Hello and welcome to this transmitter programming tutorial for the E-Flite F-16 Thunderbirds 80mm. Today I'll be programming this NX6 transmitter, but these programming instructions are applicable for all Spektrum NX radios. Let's get started by selecting a new model. Click on the scroll wheel and scroll down to System Setup. Click on System Setup, click on Yes, and now scroll down to Model Select. Now we'll scroll down to Add New Model, and click, and create. Now we have a completely blank, brand new model on the transmitter. Let's scroll down to Aircraft Type, click, and scroll down to Wing Normal, and click, and scroll to the right to select 1 aileron, 1 flap. Click on 1 aileron, 1 flap. 1 aileron, 1 flap means we'll have 1 channel controlling our ailerons and 1 channel controlling our flaps. Now let's push the back button and let's give this model a name by going to Model Name. Scroll down and click, and starting with the first character, I'll name this one F-16 80mm. Once you have the model named, you can push the back button twice, and then once more to go back to the home screen. Click the scroll wheel, and now let's go to DR and Expo to set up our dual rates and exponential. The manual calls for 2 positions for our high and low rates. High being 100% rates with a 10% expo, and low being a 70% rates with a 5% expo. I'll be using the C switch as my dual rate switch, which is a 3-position switch, but I will only be utilizing 2 of the positions. Scroll down to where it says switch on to select the switch. Click to lock it in. The 0 position will be the high rates, so we'll leave the rates at 100%, but we'll change the expo to 10%. Now we'll bump the C switch down to the 1 position for our low rate position. We'll bring those rates down to 70%. And then we'll add an expo of 5%. Now we can test the C switch to see that those are working, and they are. Keep in mind, if you bump this 3-position switch down to the 2 position, you're back to 100% rates and 0% expo. 0 position is the high rates, 1 position is the low rates. Now let's do the same for the elevator and rudder channels. Scroll up to where it says aileron and click. Scroll to the right to change it to elevator. Scroll down to switch to select the switch. Click to lock it in. High rates, we'll leave it at 100%. Add a 10% expo. Bump down to the 1 position for low rates. Bring the rates down to 70%. And add 5% expo. And test to see that those are working. And they are high rates and low. Now finally, we'll do the same for the rudder channel. Click on elevator and change to rudder. And we'll just do the same thing again. And we'll test to see that they're working. And they are. Now push the back button and click on throttle cut. Click on inhibit to select a throttle cut switch. The H switch is most commonly used as the throttle cut switch, and that's the switch I'll be using. Click on the switch H, and we can see that just by selecting a switch, it automatically sets the switch position to negative 100%. That's exactly where we want it. As long as our throttle cut is on, our throttle channel is locked in at negative 100%. This is very important when out at the flying field to help reduce the chance of an accidental throttle up. Now push the back button, and now scroll down to flaps system. Scroll down to where it says switch inhibit to select a switch. The D switch is most commonly used as a flap switch, and that's the switch I'll be using. Click to lock in the switch. For position 0, the manual calls for 0% flap value and a 0% elevator mix, so we will leave those just as they are. For position 1, it calls for a 50% flap mix, so we'll click on that 0 and scroll left to bring it all the way down to 50%. And click to lock it in. And then we'll add a negative 2% elevator mix. So click on that 0 and scroll left to bring it down to 2% and click to lock it in. For position 2, a negative 100% flap value. So click and scroll left to bring that all the way down to negative 100% and click to lock it in. Now the elevator mix requires a negative 16%. So click on that 0 and scroll left until we get to negative 16% and click to lock it in. Now our flaps are set up as they should be, but they move too quickly. Scroll down to where it says speed norm, click on norm, and scroll to the right until we get to 2.0 seconds. Now we can see the flaps come down at a more slow scale speed. Now push the back button twice to get back to the main screen. And now our NX6 is programmed and ready to fly the F-16 Thunderbirds 80mm. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial. Hello and welcome to this transmitter programming tutorial for the E-Flite F-16 Thunderbirds 80mm. Today I'll be programming with this IX14 transmitter, but these programming instructions are applicable for all Spektrum IX radios. Let's get started by setting up a brand new model. Click the little orange marker at the left-hand side of the screen, then click Proceed. Now click the three orange dots at the top right-hand side of the screen, and then click Add New Model. Default, Airplane, Create. Now we'll scroll down to the bottom of this list to find our new model, Acro. Click on Acro, and now click on the word Acro again to name the model. We'll delete what's in there, and I'll name this one F-16 80mm. Once you've got your name entered, click Done, and now push the back button twice to return back to the home screen. Now let's click on Model Setup and click on Aircraft Type. Proceed. Now click on Wing and select one aileron, one flap. One aileron, one flap means we'll have one channel controlling our ailerons and one channel controlling our flaps. Now we can push the back button twice to return back to the home screen again, and now click on Model Adjust. Click on Dual Rates and Expo, and here we can set up our dual rates and exponential. The manual calls for two positions for high and low rates. We'll start with the aileron channel, since that's what's already selected. Click on where it says Switch On to select a switch. The C switch is the switch I'll be using. With the C switch in the 0 position, that will be our high rates, so we will leave those rates at 100%. However, the manual does call for a 10% expo on the high rates. Click on the zeros in the expo column and bump those up to 10%. And OK to lock them in. Now we'll flip the C switch down to the 1 position for our low rate position, and we'll click the 100% next to dual rates. Now we can bump these down to 70%. OK to lock it in. And now click on the zeros next to Expo, and we'll bump those up to 5%. Now we can test the C switch, bump it back up to the 0 position to see our high rates, and then back down to the 1 position to see our low rates. And those are both working. Keep in mind, this is a 3-position switch. So if you bump it all the way down to the 2 position, you're back to 100% rates with 0% expo. So only utilize the 0 and 1 position. Now let's set up our elevator and rudder dual rates. Click on where it says aileron, and then click elevator. Now click on Switch On. Select the C switch. And just like before, the C switch in the 0 position is our high rates, so we'll leave those dual rates at 100%, but click on the zeros next to Expo and bring them up to 10%, and then OK to lock it in. Now flip the C switch down to the 1 position for our low rates, and click on the 100% next to dual rates and bring those down to 70%. OK to lock them in. And then click on the zeros next to Expo and bring those up to 5%. And OK to lock them in. We can test to see that our switch is working with our high rates in the 0 position and low rates in the 1 position. And they are. Now finally, let's do the same for the rudder channel. Click on Elevator and select Rudder, Switch, Now we can test to see that's working. Now that our dual rate and exponentials are set, you can now push the back button and then click on Throttle Cut. Click on where it says Inhibit to select a throttle cut switch. The H switch is most commonly used as the throttle cut switch, so that's the switch I'll be using. Select the H switch. We can see that just by selecting the throttle cut switch, it automatically sets the switch value to negative 100%. That's exactly what we want. When we flip our throttle cut on, it locks our throttle channel into negative 100%. So even if we bump the throttle stick, that throttle channel will not move beyond negative 100%. This is very important when out at the flying field to help reduce the chance of an accidental throttle up. Now push the back button again, and then click on Flap System. Click on Inhibit to select a flap switch. The D switch is most commonly used as a flap switch, and that's the switch I'll be using. Per the manual, position 0 of the flap switch, we will leave the flap value and the elevator mix value at 0. For position 1, we'll click on the 0 in the flap value and bring that down to 50%. And OK to lock it in. Now click the 0 for the elevator mix, and we'll bump that up to 2%, and OK to lock it in. Now for position 2, the manual calls for a flap value of negative 100%. So we'll click on that 0 and bring it all the way down to negative 100, and OK to lock it in. And then click the 0 for the elevator mix for position 2, and we'll bring that up to 16%, and OK to lock it in. Now we can see our flaps are set up per the manual. However, they move too fast. Click the zeros in the speed column and bump that up to 2.0 seconds. And OK to lock it in. Now we can see that when we flip our flap switch, the flaps come down at a more slow scale speed. Now that we have our flaps set up, push the back button. And now this IX-14 is programmed and ready to fly the E-Flite F-16 Thunderbirds 80mm. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial.